It's lovely to meet you, Helen. Thank you so much for speaking with me, and congratulations on Beef and the nomination. I'm pulling for y'all. I loved this show so much.
That's so good.
I do honestly feel like it is like I think it is the best show of this year, and it came out earlier this year, and I think it's going to continue to be the best show of the year. But
that's so good.
So I'm a bit curious about, I guess, like basics are just like,
No, good.
Can you tell me a bit about the process? How do you start? How do you get input and then incorporate that for each character?
Well, when I read the script, I knew that I wanted to do it. I had some very specific, I think, with each project, I always try to think of like, what is it I have to contribute? What do I have to say? And with this project, there's a lot to say. And I think I was particularly drawn to sort of the regional differences of the characters in the story in California. And then also the economic differences of the people like sort of in the story, especially as it revolves around the Asian American identity and community, because I think those two factors, economics and which region, like where you're from, basically defines a lot and sort of like kind of tears down the monolith of, like just being the monolith of Asian American person. And so I had very particular things I really wanted to say. When I met with Sunny, it was who wrote the script and was our showrunner. There was a big connection on what we wanted to do. And with contemporary film in general, I usually like to have to push reality a little bit, and to figure out what needs to be grounded and what could be like a push so it makes it a little bit more interesting. And I think my personal thought was like Amy's world could be a little bit more heightened, It also contributes to how I really wanted to show that Danny's world is a bubble and Amy's world is a bubble. And there's this like, even visually, this miscommunication and misperception people have of each other in different sort of bubbles. And so when I was doing mood boards for Amy, and for this particular series, I did a lot of, because she's a business owner and she curates her image. And so I looked at a lot of sort of Instagram businesses, and I really tried to tie sort of her idea of herself into this business that she runs, sort of like a brand identity that she has for her overreaching life. And so when I was putting the mood boards together, I was telling Sunny, one way we can make this a little bit more surreal, because his script was very grounded, but also very philosophical in a way. Is to make her wear whites and creams through most of the season, because I felt like, with the color palette, it's of a person who's in extreme control, while Amy's character is having a loss of control narratively. And so those two things would be a good juxtaposition. And then, with Danny in particular, with him, I drew from a lot of memory. So that process is a little bit different than some of my other work, because, I would like to say Danny's a very intimate character for me, because he kind of reminds me of my dad and, my brothers and the kids, the guys I went to high school with, And so I really wanted to use his character to visually show these people that I know and remember, because I feel like sometimes, because there's not enough Asian stories, that portion of it gets to be left out, that reality isn't shown a lot. And for him, I really wanted to do it. And so, so it was really about drawing from memory on Danny's side, being very kind of heightened on Amy's side with George, with June, with Fumi. And then, doing a lot of research, because, Sunny And Stephen also goes to like Korean church and to get that right. And then, even though we didn't get to see much of it, but we were very excited to do a Korean nightclub to show that. And so, yeah, there is like this very intimate process of how can we give the audience a surreal experience while showing the audience things that are normally seen on screen.
Yeah, so like I'm like an East Coast Asian, and I do think that there are like really distinctive differences between like the coasts for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then within that as well, there's like so many different cohorts, so to speak. And so it was really cool to see that, and that, like, I don't know, like the different like geographical US regions, but also like different countries of origin. And then there's like the cool Asians and like the more like sort of inspired, like more but yeah, the palette was really interesting. And I was wondering like how much input do the cast members bring in themselves for their own characters?
I mean, they have a lot. Like Allie came in and she wasn't very specific, but with Allie, she always, if you just look at her work and the things that she's done, she wants to look like a woman of like creativity and intelligence, and I think that, and she likes different silhouettes, which I thoroughly enjoy because she's also, small in stature, but I think she likes to play around with things and she doesn't necessarily want to look like, a bland person. And so creating with her was extremely fun. With Stephen, I think we were really trying to find, because Stephen's process is to work, there is a lot of working through the wardrobe. And so we had a lot of, we had like racks and racks of things we found at Goodwill. One of the biggest things Sunny and I talked about is like for Stephen's character, is I really want him to feel like, for Danny to feel like he got stuck somewhere in time, because I feel like that's how it reflects reality of how men kind of work. Yeah. And so I wanted him to feel like someone who stopped dressing himself like when he was like 25, 24, and then everything else he's ever bought afterwards is to replace that one thing, so it's like 1 equals, like you just buy something to replace it, versus Amy, she's like up to speed on the trends, so she looks more current. So we shopped a lot at Goodwill and we talked a lot about making him look like he's from the early aughts, and then, we had this one fitting and Stephen put on these like really baggy Dickies and he just like clicked into character and he was like, I know who this guy is now. Because for me, my brothers are from Torrance in El Segundo and they were always like skate kids, they skate. And I always thought, with a character like Danny and, so many sort of like Asian American growing up experiences, there is a type of gravitation towards subcultures or different types of music. I was goth when I was younger because it just makes you feel more a part of something.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say you stand out, but you're saying the opposite, actually.
Well, yeah, because if you're already in a subculture, like if you like skate or if you like metal or if you're goth or something, it's like you don't have to wait for the general culture to accept you. You have this little pocket of people that accept you already. And especially, this has nothing to do with Danny, but if you're goth, it's just like, you think I'm weird looking, I'm going to show you, weird looking. And so there is this gravitation of like small pockets. And I feel like that part of the Asian American identity is not often like spoken of. And I really wanted Danny to sort of feel that way. And so, and, Stephen, as soon as he put on those like old Dickies, like he kind of felt it and knew it, knew his character. And I think with fittings, it's always, you have an overreaching idea of what you want to do, but specific items of clothes, especially with someone like Danny, it's like a couple of items like really speak to him, like we gave him a Liz Claiborne jacket and like it really like clicked in, and I remember my dad used to buy like Liz Claiborne and like old like Nautica jackets at the flea market instead of at like a Macy's. And so those were kind of like the small things that we were really trying to bring in to make them specific. But like when actors, they talk about, especially with Stephen, they talk about emotionally what they want. And so we try to bring in them the aesthetic quality to mirror what they emotionally want to do with the clothes.
Yeah. And I love what you said about subcultures, because I felt like that was really on display, like in the whole cast. There's such a diversity. And like some of my favorite wardrobes were I loved Isaac's outfits, and like and his crew.
Yeah.
Like they had so much bling, and and also Fumi as well, because and she was just like so wildly different. But I feel like that kind of speaks to some of the subcultures that perhaps you were trying to represent.
Yeah, I mean, with Isaac, I really wanted to make him seem less like the antagonist, So I didn't want him to dress him up like a traditional like Asian gangster, because I feel like that's eclipses a whole person. And so I tried to really think of him like someone who, and he kind of reminds me of like my cousins, they would go someplace and they would buy all these kind of tchotchkes and like be like, oh, this is like a prehistoric rock or something. And that's how I like to think of Isaac, like I like to think that he has this bad temper and he does all these bad things, but he also is really into crystals and likes meditate. So like just things that sort of speaks against the violent nature of him. And we did want him to say something about like, just because you are the antagonist doesn't mean you're not creative. So he dressed in a very creative way. He also didn't have any new clothes. Like all his clothes were rented from like Universal costume house, and they were like old baby fats and I mean old like Sean Johns and things like that, because we really wanted him to feel unique and not like someone who marches to the beat of another drum,
Yeah.
And
He-
with Fumi, we really wanted to be like, if she is this person that wears Issey Miyake and Comme des Garçons and things like that, like we did not want to water that down, because it was also important to me to show a woman of a certain age that also has a very good identity of self.
no, I love their outfits so much. And I'm curious if you had like anyone who was like your favorite to dress, and not that you found was perhaps the most fun, or like had some of the most interesting pieces, like if there are any pieces that you were really attached to.
It's funny with Danny, I feel like, everyone has their own special piece. With Danny, you can't tell, but when he went to the Korean club, he wore a structure belt. And I don't know if people remember structure, but they're kind of like the old Express. They're out of business now, but it's actually Sunny's like belt. And he never threw it away. And you can't buy things that look like that anymore because it's like obsolete, but we use it on Danny because it really speaks to how he hoards things,
That's cool.
and
Yeah.
even him and Paul wearing like their $1 sandals inside of like their house. I mean, there's just like so many things. We reprinted a Sprint t-shirt for Danny because I found a Sprint t-shirt while thrifting, but we couldn't actually use it because it had like Sprint locations on the background. So we actually like bought a new t-shirt and reprinted all the graphics to get it cleared, because I was like, oh, my brother is used to wear all these free t-shirts, and I really wanted him to like wear that. But like with Amy, I felt like there were so many things of her that were interesting. I really loved her first outfit because I felt like it explained a lot about her. And
I read a little bit about that.
yeah,
Amy's wardrobe, I feel like, was so like everybody was talking about the show when it came out, still are, and like one of the things that we were talking about was like the costume. Like it really the costumes themselves made headlines, which I thought was so cool. And like that's why I was kind of drawn to this interview as well. Like especially Amy's like her glasses to the hat, everything.
Yeah, no, for Amy, we really, we really thought she doesn't shop in department stores. Like she's an online shopper. She's like a boutique shopper. So we did ship in so many things for Allie to try on, to get like, she tried on 30 and there's 2 that end up on the show, to get like sort of the right idea of her. And I think like the dress that she wore to Jordan's, party, there's just so many things that she wore that's just like a wonderful curation for this person. And George, everyone talks about his like cardigans and stuff. But for me, when I dressed George, I really wanted to show that like Asian men can dress, like they dress well, and they dress in a creative way that doesn't have anything to do with like suits or anything, like George is a creative. So I really wanted this like kind of more international kind of feeling for George. So there's things for each one of them that because it's so connected to the character. So that's why I really like there's a piece for everyone that I really love. Like Paul wore those Champion sweatshirts and they just reminded me of like,
yes, oh my God, yeah,
like malls. And I like malls, but like not fun malls, like not fancy outdoor malls, but like malls in like the suburbs that are like 10 years behind. And so like there's all these things that we really like seeked out, so it like really reflected how specific they all wore and how weird they kind of looked when they're like together, interacting together, because usually people who live that far apart and who have their own kind of like bubble and cliques don't interact together.
yeah. So I think I have time for one more question, but it's a little bit more general, but being a costume designer, do you think that affects the way in which you people watch? I think everybody people watches a little bit, but like when you're looking at people, like, do you feel like you glean different kinds of details than others might?
Yeah, I'm constantly people watching because I find it fascinating, because people never look the way you expect them to. And I feel like those sort of like oddities is what makes a character on film or TV like real. Like if they look too, if their look makes too much sense, it's actually not great for a character. When you look at people, it's like someone could dress really well in person, but they could like like have clothes, but they don't want to spend money on clothes like indoors. I think sometimes in film and TV, like you try to make everyone's world look a little bit too perfect, whereas in reality it's like an accumulation of a lot of our experiences. And so yes, I tend to people watch a lot, and I try to bank things in my memory. And whenever I get stuck on something, I like to take a walk and like kind of look at people and remind myself, there's never one clear way of doing a character. There's always something unexpected. And I always think like life is stranger than fiction. And so if you could even mirror and get even the smallest element of reality, then you could have a more interesting looking film.
I love that. I think that makes a lot of sense, because you're right. It's like if there's too much internal consistency
Yeah.
in somebody's wardrobe, then it's just not realistic, because that's not how people work.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that's my time, but I really appreciate the time that you've taken to speak with me. And again, congratulations. I'm really pulling for this show and everyone in it.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.